did 2 months ago in a conference called Django Day Copenhagen. This is from the conference. It's a really nice small conference. 1 day, 1 track. We had, I think, 9 talks and lightning talks. And it was a super great experience. And I highly recommend joining next year in 2023. It's one of the favorite conferences of mine. So this is a variation of that. But let's start with a bit of an exercise. Raise your hand if you've ever written a bug. Any kind of code that didn't do what you expected it to do. And if there's anybody who didn't raise their hand, they probably have never written code. Because it's inevitable that we make mistakes. Some of them are technical mistakes in terms of like we do the wrong thing. And some of them are logical mistakes in terms of we tried to do something, but the computer didn't agree. It still works. It just does the wrong thing. My name is Juhis. I work here at Futurice as a developer advocate. I've been at the company for a little bit over 4 years. I get to spend my days doing this. Every week there's a couple of events with different developer groups. And for me, Python has always been my favorite language and really close to my heart. In addition to what I do at Futurice, I also teach programming and I mentor juniors, trying to get people from different backgrounds, different interests, a lot of career changers to get into the technology field. Because I think it's important that we have a diverse group of people building the technology of the future. I also run a couple of communities myself. I'm the founder of Turkula Frontend, which is a frontend meetup in Turku. I run Helsinki Dev Lunch, which is a monthly lunch gathering in Helsinki. And I'm one of the organizers at the React Finland conference that is coming up next fall. I also occasionally tweet about technology, and I write a weekly blog, sometimes about technology, sometimes about life, communities. Especially lately, it's been kind of a little bit more all over. And I'm super excited to be speaking today on this meetup. This is my first talk at the HelPy meetup, but my first ever tech talk was in PyCon Finland 2016. That was my first ever talk. I did a live coding session with no backup slides because I was first timer and I didn't know that you should have backups. Luckily, it went really well. I didn't need any backups. I had 2 slides, the opening slide and a thank you slide, and everything else I was kind of winging it. And I was just wondering, who else thinks that we're in this picture? I think there must be some people. This is PyCon Finland 2016. There's at least a couple of people. Basically, you don't need to find yourself, but if you attended PyCon Finland 2016, you're part of the group. That was a big part of me getting excited about communities, and especially becoming a speaker. But we're not here to remember the past, but rather to talk about debugging. And there's one kind of dominant feeling that is associated with debugging, and that is stress, anxiety. Debugging is often seen as a really negative thing. Often when I talk with developers, they say that debugging is the thing that they want to do the least when it comes to software development. For me, it's the thing I like to do the most. I really like debugging, and I hope to give some ideas during this talk for those of you who think about it through the stress. But why is debugging often so stressful? There's deadlines. We never have unlimited time to build something, especially if there's actual users for it. There's a lot of internal expectations. This industry is riddled with imposter syndrome, comparing each other to others, thinking, am I good enough? And when you're trying to solve something that you don't know how to solve, those feelings can become stronger. There's also a lot of external expectations from your team especially, I'm not sure if I'm able to fix this. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Like I said, for me, debugging is one of my favorite things, if not the best thing, when it comes to building software. And that's because, for me, debugging is a process. It's kind of like a step-by-step thing, where I don't need to know anything about the software, or the code base, or even the programming language. And I'm often able to at least help other people debug what's wrong, even if they're working with languages that I've never used. Because debugging is not purely a kind of technical tooling issue. It's a mindset and a process that you need to follow. So today I'm gonna approach debugging from these three perspectives. First, we'll talk a little bit about fundamentals. Things that matter no matter what you do. No matter what kind of software you build, what languages you use. These will help you get to the right place. Then we're gonna talk about tools and techniques, specifically for Django. And then we're gonna talk about a couple of secret, non-technical methods that will help you get done with the problems, move on, and become less stressed. So let's start with the fundamentals, the building blocks. Quite often, when we encounter a problem, we might get a little bit of feeling of panic. Oh, I need to fix this fast, so that nobody gets mad, or even that nobody notices. But if you're rushing into things, I think we all know that it never leads to good stuff. Even if it's Friday afternoon, and you just want to make the hot fix, so you can leave for the weekend. I've done it a couple of times, and pretty much every time on Monday, you find that 5 other things broke, and then you need to re-roll back your kind of smart hotfix. Yes.
Only Monday?
Sometimes they could be a little bit longer due to kind of surface, but quite often also, the Monday, you already start to see other things get broken.
I was thinking more of Saturday.
Well, Saturday is also, I usually close my laptop for the weekend, so I will wait for the Monday. But the important thing is to stop and take a breath and kind of assess the situation. There's always enough time to make the right decision, rather than being fast at making the wrong decision. And this is not easy, because of the deadlines and the expectations and all of that. The second one, and this is something I've seen a lot of people, regardless of their skill level, is that when they see a problem in the program, or the web app, or the mobile app, or whatever, they immediately jump into the code, and they start looking at the code, because they think they know where the problems are. And then quite often, they might make some changes. The problem is not fixed, but they don't know if it's because they made the wrong things or because they're at the wrong part of the code. So what I like to do is to just follow the breadcrumbs from the end to the start. So let's say you're building a Django app with views and templates. You see something going wrong. You take a look at the URL. You see, okay, this is the view, or this is the route that is causing it. This is the view, this is the template. And you move backwards until you find the culprit. At least until you find the proximity of where things are going bad. Or if you're using Django REST framework, you can start from the API calls, the HTTP requests. You look at that, okay, the data is wrong. Let's move backwards. Which view, which model, which controller, where is this coming from? And there's this really great tweet of a meme by Jen from, I think it's a couple of years old, where when you have a problem, and then you set the breakpoint, and then you run the code, and the breakpoint never hits. And quite often I see this not in the way of putting a breakpoint and it not hitting, but like I said previously, people start to make changes to the part that they assumptions and it tells us, yeah, you got this, you know it, you don't need to double check. But when we debug, we need to have the same level of kind of scrutiny than when we help our parents with the computer problems. It's like, is it plugged in? Don't just tell me, go look. Is it plugged in? Did you restart the machine? Don't think that you did actually do it. Because quite often we think that we've done something, or we think that we know something, but we don't actually know. Our brain skips a couple of steps every now and then. It makes assumptions, and it makes kind of reasoning that is not based on reality. So that's the kind of starting point. You take a break, you breathe a little bit, you start to assess the situation. Where could this be happening? And then we start with the tools and techniques. And my absolute favorite debugging tool is one of the most underappreciated ones. And it is print.
Yes, to the beat.
Yes. This audience seems to be more excited about print than the last one. But basically this is where I start from. I just type this. It takes me a couple of seconds. I put it in. I run it. If I can see that in the console, I know that I'm on the right path. And print is super good because it's so simple. Sure, you can do logging, you can do sophisticated stuff, but that takes time to set up. It takes time to think about. It takes time. And when you're starting debugging, you just want to make sure that you're at the right part of the code. When I did this talk at Copenhagen, one person asked kind of why certain people are giving juniors the advice that print is bad. And I think it's partially because we don't want print to end up in the production most often. But if you take that and you kind of simplify it to saying don't put print into your code, you're losing a really valuable tool. And I would argue you shouldn't leave any of the debugging stuff into your production code. Running debugger in production is probably not the best thing. But print is so simple. You can start with just I was here, but then you can print out variables, some data, just kind of explore a little bit. But what print needs is you add it, you run, you see what happens, then you make a change, you run it again, and it can become quite cumbersome to kind of jump around. So the next tool in the toolbox is the debugger. If you're using Python 3.7 or later, as I hope many of you get to use, there's a standard library function breakpoint. If you are still stuck in the unfortunate past of legacy code, then you need to import PDB and set the trace. If you're using 3.7, I hope you're using 3.10, because 3.10 is, in my opinion, the best Python version, especially because of pattern matching and a little bit improved error messages. But this is how you invoke a breakpoint. And to those who are not familiar with breakpoints, the idea is that when the execution hits this line, it stops everything it's doing. And it gives you this kind of a REPL. On the first line, you can see PDB in parentheses. That's your REPL prompt. And then you can run different commands to kind of explore what's happening. The first one is list, which tells you where in the code are we right now. It's especially handy if you put multiple breakpoints. you expect something else. But even if you use types, you might get the wrong values. And that tells you, hey, the problem is one step above. But you also get the REPL that you get if you type Python. So you can type any variable, any Python expression, and you get the outcome. So this lets you stop at one place and explore what's happening. You can move forward, you can move backwards, you can jump into functions. And it gives this like really nice way of being able to take a look at multiple things at the same time. If you use templates with Django, there's a really cool trick that you can do if you register a custom filter called PDB, or it can be called anything, and you just put a breakpoint into that. In the template, you can do this, and it will trigger the breakpoint and give you the message. It's especially nice if you have some complex data that you're passing in, something where just printing it out might not give the kind of all the context. Because once again, this gives you the REPL. So you can experiment, you can explore, you can run functions. And I really like the syntax. It looks really nice, it's really easy to add into any project. It's just 4 lines of code. I've been putting this as a kind of a utility filter to any project that I'm working with on Django. And it's just so handy. So printing and debugger are the kind of explorative tools that you know that something's happening and you kind of know where it is. So you're looking at the problem. The next step is the Django debug toolbar, which is a super popular kind of, you set it up before you have problems. And then you can use it to kind of investigate stuff. So it looks like this on the front end. You get this sidebar on the right. And then you can look at the headers, the requests, the SQL queries that got executed, and all sorts of other stuff. In the web browser, when you're looking at the kind of server output, I think Django debug toolbar is a little bit too kind of messy to install. That's the only part that I'm not super excited about. I would just like to say like pip install and then put like one line somewhere. I always need to read the docs multiple times and see kind of where I need to put what. But once you get it set up, it's really cool. There's also one tool that I haven't used myself, but I learned about it a couple of months ago, called Django Run DBG. And it's kind of an enhancement into the debugger on the kind of full cap cycle in a way. That if you use like Django REST framework, you can use this with uselink, and you can kind of inspect the requests that are made on the front. You will get a better idea if you check the repo. I just wanted to bring it up because it seems to be catching up a little bit of interest in the internet. And then most of these happened in the browser or in the terminal. But you can also enhance your IDE or your code editor. Now I don't use JetBrains or any of those kind of specific IDEs. But you can basically set up breakpoints and debuggers without writing any code. So you can just do it on the side panel and then you can run it inside the editor, which gives you a little bit of more kind of like a little bit more tools in the context of the code as well. There's a really good talk by Luciana Caput on debugging Django and Flask in VS Code. It's unfortunately unlisted on YouTube, so you need to use the actual link to find it. And then I learned about Colo 2 months ago in the conference. And that kind of blew my mind. So Colo is a kind of debugging tool that integrates the VS Code on your development environment. And you can get all the requests and responses, SQL queries, background tasks, values for local variables, salary jobs, all of that within your VS Code. So it keeps recording all of them into a local, I think there is SQLite database. And then you can explore it right at the editor, where you spend most of the time anyway. And there was a really good talk about it by the creator of Column that you can find from djangoday.tk. I recommend watching it. He also talked about why he doesn't like debuggers, and he did the talk just before me. So it was a really nice contrast of somebody telling that debuggers are bad, and then I got it and I like debuggers, I love them. But it was a really good kind of contrast on the conference side as well. And Will is just a great guy. But I recommend taking a look at the talk, because he explains kind of how they ended up where they are. It's currently in beta. It's only on VS Code, but they're currently developing it. And yeah, this is him doing the talk in the conference. So those are some of the technical tools that you can use to dig deeper, get a better understanding of what is happening inside your Django app. But like I said at the beginning, to me debugging is not a technical task. Those tools are useful and they're great, but they're not absolutely necessary. Because I think most of the time, debugging is solving human problems, or at least problems created by humans. So the first of my secret bag of tools is what I call a brain dump. And the idea is here that you take a pen and paper and you write down what is the problem. Now, write what is actually the problem, not what you think it is, not how you think it's solved, but like this when I do this happens. Kind of like a user story type of thing. Don't put any of your own ideas in. Just explain what happened. Then write down all of your assumptions. What do you think is causing it? Where do you think it happens in the code? What could be the problem? And then write down what have you tried. And the idea with this is that it offloads all of this kind of messy, abstract thinking from your head into a paper, so you don't risk losing it. And then you can take a break. You can go for a walk, you can take a nap, sleep overnight, and let your subconscious work on the problem. Because like I said, the brain is amazing. The subconscious can solve a lot of problems that we are too kind of stuck and too narrow viewed when we are just writing the code. The second one is talking to a rubber duck. Now rubber duck is a great kind of inside joke in the industry, but it's also a really, really effective tool. The idea, to those who are not familiar, is that instead of asking your colleague, you take a rubber duck that you should have on your desk at all times, and you talk to them. Like, what is the problem? Can you help me? You ask questions from the duck. And quite often, before the duck answers, you've already gotten to the solution. Now sometimes you might need more than just one duck. I have a Sherlock Holmes duck, which is for like especially difficult problems. But the magic with rubber ducks is that it forces us to take all the steps. The brain skips steps when you explain something. You're like, oh, I have this back end, I have this route, and then I send this data to the front end. But that's not how it happens in the code. There's a lot more steps, and we are really good at skipping them, because we think we know. But when you talk to the duck is not gonna take it. It's gonna need all the information, all the steps, all the assumptions, and all the variables. And then it will help you figure out what the problem is. I want to do a really quick, another cut break towards the end. There are really great Python conferences in the nearby of Finland. PyCon Estonia, I was there 2019. scene is really great. And at least in 2019, there was a bunch of people from all around Europe